Good morning, New Life Church. It is a joy for Vicki and I to be with you, and I don't say that lightly. It is a joy. We've been looking forward to this. We remember very clearly the last time we were with you, the Spirit of God here with us. And we've known the Mammon family for, I think, a few decades now, at least. And it's a joy to be a part of their lives again. And I'm sure you're aware how privileged you are to have the kind of worship leadership you have in Pastor Jeff. And as we were singing, I was being ministered to by not just the words, but the chord selection and the love in Jeff's heart for God. And that always helps me worship and inspires me as a brother in the faith in walking with you. So thank you, Pastor Jeff. And also, Pastor Jeff, I wanted to bring you something from your father-in-law. The last time I spoke, I was leaving Kansas City and taking an all-night flight, I think it was, to get here. And the person who took me to the airport, I didn't know at the time, was David Hubbs. And he's the father-in-law, or Trish's dad. And he gave me something to give to Jeff. So I spoke with him on the phone this past week, and he asked me again to give Jeff. So would you come? Because on behalf of your father-in-law, I want to give you this generous gift of $1.
Thank you.
And because Vicki and I feel sorry for you, we're just going to give you 20 because we think your father-in-law is a bit of a cheapskate. So there, just help yourself to an ice cream cone after church.
He's on Zoom.
Oh, he's on. Hey, David, how are you? Sorry, I didn't know you were going to be listening. I wouldn't have said that, but you need to up the ante a little bit. In these days, there is a thing such as inflation going on. So anyway, yeah. Well, I'd like to speak with you for just a few moments about a movement of God by the people of God. Think with me as we look at this little blue marble we're on, and I'm going to get a little help today with our sound. I usually have a clicker, but and I didn't get your name. I'm so sorry. Tom? Connie. Tawny. Okay, Tawny. Imagine that we're suspended above this little blue marble we live on, and we look back and we try and see what God sees in the Church of the Nazarene around the world. You would see an amazing network of relationships, friendships, people we know by name in many countries around the world. You would see about 2.6 million Nazarene members and many others who attend who aren't members in 164 plus nations, more than McDonald's or Starbucks has. You are connected to them in 193 languages worshiping today on this Sunday. And that membership has doubled twice in the last 30 years. The church has grown. And all those members like you here at New Life are connected to a local church, over 30,000 of them. And those local churches are connected to about 500 districts. You're on the Northern California district. You know that. And those districts and world missionaries are connected to 35 fields. For instance, one field, India, where Vicki and I have been many times, good friends in India. And that's one field, 1.4 billion people. But then Northern Europe is 26 countries and not anywhere near 1 billion people. So our fields are organized and structured. And then all those fields and districts are connected to 6 regions, indicated by those 6 colors on the screen. And those 6 regions are connected to one general board that you actually elect from this district. Maybe somebody from this church has gone as a delegate to that general assembly and sat on that assembly floor with 1,000 other people from all over the world who vote about the mission and sending the message through the Church of the Nazarene all over the world. And that international board and general assembly meets. In fact, they just met a couple months ago, virtually on Zoom. So we are a part of this amazing family that we see in the first worship service in heaven, where all tribes and languages and people from around the world, Jesus takes the seal and breaks it on that scroll, and he reads the names of every redeemed person. That's who we are. We're a part of the family of God, this amazing mosaic of people that he has brought into redemption. And we've been doing this and meeting this way for many years. And this structure I just shared with you is very unique. There are over 30,000 denominations in the world. There are only 4 that have the structure I just shared with you. There are only 4 that are truly international churches. Now, there are Baptist churches all over the world, but they're not connected, not like we are. There are Pentecostal churches all over the world, and many of our brothers or sisters, we serve, we work with them out there, but they're not connected. But you are, you're connected. You're unique, and you're unique not only because of that, because you give more to missions than any other denomination except Christian Missionary Alliance, who's on par with you. That's how committed you are. It's why Bill Bright, Campus Crusade for Christ in the 1970s, when he looked at all those 30,000 denominations, guess who he chose when he wanted to distribute the Jesus film? To do that, he chose you because of this network that we have all over the world. And so you pay for these motorcycles. You pay a stipend to these men and women who show the Jesus film to tribes and languages that have never heard about Christ and God's love through Jesus. You pay for the motorcycles and the backpacks that they have with the film and the projectors and the screens. You support that. There are over 900 of those teams that you support as Nazarenes. And we do that in partnership with others. This tribe in central India that I was in had never heard about Jesus until you showed the film to them. And now suddenly you had 300 brand new brothers and sisters who wanted to become followers of Christ. And that's a huge challenge. And that's why you send me and Vicki, because we help structure and organize and train and equip and resource those people in those new areas that have never heard. These 2 men are resourced by you. And then we come alongside and equip them. We give them materials and we partner with them. And they go to different tribes and villages every week. And this is being done all over the world. We prayed for Ukraine today because of our connection, our networks. You know Vova and Sylvia, our district superintendent from Ukraine, and his wife. And they traveled, they spent, getting people out of Kyiv into Poland. And you support them. And then you support the field directors, Trino and his wife, Anna, and Jay and Tiana Sundberg. Trino and Anna are over all the former Soviet countries. They're over Russia. They're over Armenia. They live in Armenia. And then the Sundbergs live in Poland. And so they go to the border on one side. I asked Trino a few weeks ago how we could pray for them. And he said, John, I'm meeting with the Russian Nazarene pastors in just a week. And they don't know what's happening in Ukraine. They don't believe the Ukrainian pastors that they work with in youth camps, children's camps, education, that network again, where we partner together to get the mission done. They don't know what's going on. They don't believe it. And there's tension between the pastors and churches in Ukraine and Russia. Pray for unity. And so as you continue to pray, I know you won't stop praying just because we're ending this, our emphasis of 50 of all the people praying around the world, 500,000 people. You'll continue to pray for the unity of the church in that broken area of the world. But this is your brothers and sisters. This is Moldova you're looking at with your Nazarene brothers and sisters who are going to the border. And even Nazarenes have moved out of their houses and their apartments and let refugees live in those houses and apartments. The churches that we have all around those countries, Hungary and Poland, et cetera, are filled with refugees. That's who we are. This is a center that you are renting. Every time you give your missions check, you're renting that center. We just started renting it a few months ago. Jay and Tiana Sundberg organized that. And they bring refugees every day into that center and they reposition them. That's what we do. That's who we are. That's our DNA. You run the rehab centers. You have 10 rehab centers in Ukraine. This is one country. Remember, I said we're in over 164. This is just Ukraine. Those rehab centers, you help resource them for men and women who are addicted in some form to something. And you run micro businesses all over the world. But this one's in Ukraine, a cabinet shop. And this fishing pond, I love the way they fish there. When they want to get the fish out of there, this supports one of those rehab centers. They drain the lake, they scoop up the fish off the bottom, and then they fill it back up. They sell the fish at the market, and that money pays for their meals. Plus, I think they eat a few of those fish. But that's the kind of thing that we do because we're networked together with the local church. We've been doing it over 120 years, making Christ-like disciples in the nations. Because Jesus said, go into all the world. Baptize, teach. Tell them about my love for them, the Father's love. And so just a year ago, you sent this group of global missionaries. Vicki and I are global missionaries. And then just in March, you sent this group out. There are two kinds of missionaries now. We just restructured in the Church of Nazarene. One is a short term and one is a long term. Two kinds. Vicki and I are long term. Short term, you could be a short term missionary. A young woman was sitting in our apartment in Budapest, Hungary. She didn't know what she was going to do with her degree from Point Loma Nazarene University. We said to Amanda, Vicki said, God loves you, Amanda, and Vicki and I, John and I have a wonderful plan for your life. And we called the president of one of our schools in Europe, and within 6 weeks, Amanda had flown back to California, packed up her bags, and spent the next year as a short-term missionary, volunteer, funded by her friends and parents, and by you because you paid for her bedroom and her meals in that school at European Nazarene Bible College. And she served as the assistant to the dean for a year and made a wonderful impact with her life. So that's what you do. You support that system. We're all those missionaries. So we talk a lot about being missional. That's one of our 3 core values as Nazarenes. Well, missional is different than being on missions because missions is what we do together. Missionary is what Vicki and I are. And so the mission is God's, the Imago Dei that we prayed about this morning together, the image of God in every human being. And so we're on a mission as missional people with some missionaries, and we do missions together around the world. That's what we do. Now, I stuck this picture in here because if you went across the bay to Concord and you went back to 1965, 66, you're looking at a kid who was flunking out of Concord High School. I had F's and D's and maybe a C or two. And I stepped into the kingdom over the weekend and I went to my high school counselor the next morning and I said to him, Mr. Bueller, I became a follower of Jesus and I feel like I'm going to be a cross-cultural worker of some kind. And my pastor said, if I'm being called to be a missionary or a pastor, I have to go to university, to Pasadena College at the time, Point Loma Nazarene University. And Mr. Bueller said, John, you can't go to college. You're flunking out of high school. You are, and here, these words are stuck in my head today, 50 some years later. You are not college material. And I said, Mr. Bueller, I understand what you're saying. I would agree with you if you were looking at it from a human perspective, but God has come into my life and I want to change. Help me. So Mr. Bueller in the school put me in what they call over on that side of the bay. I don't know what they call it here in San Francisco, but bonehead classes. I think it referred to what they thought about your brain at that point. But they boneheaded me up until I started getting some pretty decent grades. And, thank God for teachers who are on the front line. Teachers who believe that there's capacity in every human being and invest in that classroom, in a kid in a way that they get motivated. And I became motivated. 6 months later, I met the woman in that picture who's seated now on this front row. We just celebrated our 51st anniversary, May 1. And so our kids during COVID all came to our house and we had a wonderful time with masks on and tests and all that stuff. But we got it done. And God matched me up with a person who is a straight A student. Doesn't God have a sense of humor? He takes a guy with F's and puts him with a woman with A's, and then they take a life journey together. And I've learned more from my wife than anybody else in life. Well, you sent us to this part of the world, Eurasia. We spent several years in those 96 countries. We didn't get to all of them, but we were in most of the countries where the Church of the Nazarene is working. And then you sent us to this part of the world, Asia Pacific. And we were there for 15 years, lived in this little place down under. You recognize that Google map? And here's some of your Nazarene brothers and sisters down there hanging around. They have wonderful families just like we have here. And they're just wonderful people, those Aussies. Vicki and I fell in love with them, of course. And the most beautiful birds in the world. These are in our backyard. Vicki could feed them out of her hand. And this little guy named Albert, the laughing kookaburra, he'd come to our house every day. We lived there. And by the way, thank you. See this little box? You've paid for every house Vicki and I have lived in for decades. And by the way, this is not one of them. This is a house down the street from us, okay? But I thought I'd throw that Aussie house in there. When we didn't live in this one, this is in the outback. That's you put us in better housing than that. But you see this little box? When you put coins in this box, and you have 30,000 churches putting coins in a box like this, and 2.6 million people and plus, and you put all that together, you end up paying for thousands of houses and schools and clinics around the world. That's what this little thing does when you and I come and bring a sacrifice of praise. Well, about 3 years ago, the director of global missions called Vicki and I. We were getting ready to retire the following year, move back here and be with our kids who live on the California coast up and down. And Vern Ward said, John, would you and Vicki pray about extending your contract for a few more years? And so we did, and we are still doing this. We will retire at General Assembly next year, actually a few weeks after. And our job now is to oversee those. Remember I mentioned we had 35 fields? So Vicki and I have been field directors. And so he asked us to train and orient new field directors. So these are your 35 field directors and their spouses and some global mission team. And just before COVID, we brought them all together, and we spent a week and a half in training, resourcing, encouraging, praying. We had special worship services to just lift the troops, and then we sent them back out, and then COVID hit. And so the last 2 years, we've been doing this, just like we're doing this morning on Zoom. I see all of you on the camera here this morning that are attending online. We're doing that all over the world, and we're still getting the mission done, except in more creative ways. And these are your brothers and sisters, those 35 field directors and some of their spouses online who are working together, and we meet every last Tuesday of the month for 2 hours. We've never been able to do that before. Zoom ended up being a gift. They say, don't ever waste a crisis, So this crisis has become a gift in some ways to the church. Now, I know it's caused a lot of suffering. I mean, we had one district that recently reported in 1 year, this is in another country where they didn't have access to any medicines. They lost 7 pastors on that district to COVID. They lost 126 lay people on that district to COVID. We're still seeing that happen. I mean, this week we learned of another person who passed. But that's the world we've been sent into. And as you prayed, Pastor Jeff, this morning, God's not surprised by this. He will embrace the chaos and embrace us in the midst of that and lead us through. And he'll give us good things happening. Like you see in Cambodia, what you did during COVID in 12 months. Look at those numbers. You started 25 new ministries. You have 61 churches in Cambodia. And those 61 churches, because they're so appreciative of what you've done for them in terms of sending missionaries. Now think of Cambodia. They gave 25% of their total income to missions during COVID because they appreciate what you have done for them. They want to give back. You served over 700 families through Nazarene Compassionate Ministries. And they saw over 290 people join the church during COVID in 1 year. in one of their reports. You've been buying bicycles there for $30 and you've been selling them back for 15. So we don't create jealousies and codependencies. We have a system to try and add dignity while we support and not just give everything, but build confidence. And that's what you've been doing. So these kids can get to school because they have to ride an hour on their bike to get to a classroom. Otherwise, they don't get educated. And we believe in education. When I was there the last time, I met this woman in an orange jumpsuit, and she had described as a child this tall. She said, I hid in the bushes as the Khmer Rouge killed my entire family, my village. I was the only survivor. And I was there because she was enrolled in the 24 courses of study that every ordained elder in the Church of Nazarene around the world takes to become a pastor or a missionary. Jeff and I took the same basic courses. And so she's enrolled in the course now to become a Nazarene pastor in Cambodia. Cambodia is a beautiful success story of your investment. And so are these wells, fresh water wells all over the world. This one in India. I snapped that picture out of the front door of the church in Washim, India. This one's in the Philippines. Those blue pipes. I showed this picture, I think, to you the last time I was here. You probably have forgotten. I don't expect you to remember, but you delivered fresh, pure water to this village of several thousand people. One of those blue pipes takes pure water to 5 families, and they're all over that community. The only clean water they have, or the only water they have, is that dirty water. And that's why most of their kids were dying before they were 5. But you cared enough to go in there and do something about it. I snapped this little girl's picture. She picked up that bucket and walked down the main street of her rock-strewn town. You create fun places for kids to play because you believe God loves kids. And that's the way you express love. You build basketball courts and many other ways for kids. You're involved in hygienic education and garbage collection. You worked with this village so that the government, who didn't even care about these people, started bringing in the garbage cans and the garbage trucks because you sent missionaries in there who helped with community development. Now there's a Church of the Nazarene there that has a clinic, has playground, has after-school tutoring, all because you cared. You run children's homes all over the world. Vicki and I have served on 3 of the 6 regions. So we've seen what we call child development centers. You might have some here in San Francisco because they're not just in India like this picture here. Vicki and I just did a month-long tour in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. And we met a woman from this town, Pune, India, 13 years old, the most beautiful young woman. In a conversation with her, one of you adopted her, brought her, she had no parents, living on the streets. You brought her here to Illinois and adopted her, and now she's a part of your family. That's because that's what we do. Child development centers. This one's in Hungary, right along the Ukraine border. You built this center that they're standing in. It's actually a church. But that's what we do all over the world. These are your kids. The House of James in Ukraine, there are 3 of them. Sean, in the black shirt here, he saw children living in conduits under the road. He went back to the home church in Arizona, Tucson, and he said, we've got to do something about this. He started this 20 years ago, just roughly. And now he's married to a Ukrainian woman. They've had to leave the country during the bombing and so forth. The children are being cared for by Ukrainians, and they live in these homes. This is a couple of the parents who are caring for those children. You make that possible, and not just in Ukraine, but in several countries in the world. This is a Shechem Children's Home. You own and operate that. This local church owns that center. You don't know it because the network is so big, you kind of can't keep up with all the news. But that's why we're here, is to say, hey, look, you guys are having an impact. Every time you give to missions, you're actually impacting because of our relationships. You're changing people's lives. I saw your children leave for children's church here this morning. And here you are. You're impacting them. Out of the school you own in Cebu, Philippines. I was there to speak at their graduation. 75 graduates. Here are 32 of them that had degrees that address the issues related to human trafficking. All of the issues. Support systems, job placement, counseling, recovery, etc. And you do this through all your schools. You own and operate 52 universities and colleges around the world. Education has been a part of our DNA from the beginning. We've gone down basically 4 tracks: evangelism, church planting, education, and compassionate ministry from the very beginning. 1895, Phineas Bresee here in California with Cuba. Cuba was at the beginning of the church. We were an international church from the beginning. This man here in the blue shirt, there are 3 field directors there. Bill Kwan, Kafoa, Larry West from Oklahoma, a little state in the middle of the United States. Those brothers we were talking to this young man. He was one of 159 young people in this village, Rowenas is the name of it, who you sponsored for an education. Otherwise, he would not have been educated. I asked him, what are you getting your degree in? He said, medicine. I said, what are you going to do when you graduate? He said, I'm going to live right here in my village. We're standing on Main Street. He said, I live here. I'm going to be the first doctor in my village. And you already had started a clinic there where you sell aspirin and ointment that they didn't have access to. You sell it to them for pesos on the dollar so they can afford to buy it, but you supplement the extra part of that through your missions giving. That's what we do. And you support the boards that make those decisions that move into these areas. That board, by the way, is in Taipei, Taiwan. I've met with them many times. And this one here is behind, because we're online, I'm not going to say where it's at, but this is, you see there, you're not looking at faces there because their lives are in danger. But this is a board made up of several denominations that came to us and asked us to provide those 24 courses of study to educate their people in dangerous places. And so you have missionaries in those places with these people delivering those 24 courses of study. Vicki and I have taught there in that area. That's what we do. These boards. Here are 3 boards in Papua New Guinea. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But we partner with people. The woman in the red top there, her Papua New Guinean sweater. She's from Temecula, California. She worked with Point Loma. And there she was working, she's one of the top educational professional consultants in the United States. She's worked with all the big universities. And she gave her time to travel with me and Vicki to 7 different countries and work with our schools to develop them. She didn't charge us $1 because she believes in the mission and the message of the Church of the Nazarene. And that's what she's done. And so that's what you've been supporting. You've been supporting these teams. We mentioned 193 languages. This is Hungarian. And because of you, almost every denomination in Hungary buys Your Holiness literature to educate their children in Sunday school. If you have your smartphone, just go to your search engine real quick. And right now, just go ahead. Somebody do this with me. And type in, I'm going to do this with you. So we do this timely together. WHDL. WHDL. What pops up? Wesleyan Holiness Digital Library. You know who owns that? You do. You know who paid for it? You did, along with 30-some thousand other congregations around the world. You remember Books for Pastors. Some of you have been with the Church of the Nazarene long enough. You remember Books for Pastors. We were going to get books to all the pastors in the world. We couldn't do it. Then the internet came along and we took that money and somebody gave us some money. And now this library that has thousands of books in several languages can be accessed for free anywhere in the world. And the 24 courses of study can be taken without paying for books, because books are expensive and people can't get educated. So you're making sure people in their languages are receiving education through any place where there's an internet. That's what we do. And you still deliver hardbound books. We were on this island, the government, I was the regional education director for Asia Pacific, and they said you can't have an accredited degree for your 24 courses of study unless you have a library of 5,000 books. So remember our network? We called one of our schools here in the United States. We said, can you send us some books? So Lon Dagley, the librarian, sent 4,500 books. 500 short of what we needed, but we had 500 from other places. And now we could get accredited degrees. And then 3 of you got on planes, librarians, and you flew to that little island and you spent a month cataloging all those books. You see how they have the little white reference on the end? So the students could now check out books. And you operate the faculties. This one you're looking at is in Papua New Guinea. This one's in Myanmar, Burma. This is not a faculty, but it's a classroom that's there because you care and you give to Nazarene Missions. And we just get the job done. And you make it possible. In this class, this is along the border of Nepal, right along Myanmar, India, and Vicki and I were teaching. They had never had a theology class. First one on that district. The man in the far left in the white shirt, he was a witch doctor. His son, 14, was dying. For 2 years, he treated his son with all of his incantations and bones and whatnot. And finally, when his son was almost dead, he asked Christians to come pray. So some of our Nazarene pastors went, laid hands on his son. Within 2 weeks, his son, who had been sick for 2 years, was healed. Now he's enrolled in the course of study to become a Nazarene pastor. That's what you and I do. My dad was a farmer from Kansas, Missouri. We weren't college people. We didn't go to college. Moores didn't go to college. And he was so proud when my twin brother and I graduated from Point Loma, my sisters graduated from college. Imagine the pride of this father in Southeast Asia, who you paid for his son's education because they, on $2 a day, $3 a day, couldn't pay for it. You did when you gave through our work. And imagine the pride of that dad when his son comes home with his robe and cap. Every time I stop and think about this, I get chills because I've met these young people, and you have too. You know them. But Vicki and I have been privileged to serve and walk alongside of them. That's what we do. You're responding to disasters all the time. You're very familiar with disaster right here in this city. You know, Vicki and I were raised right across the bay, and we used to run around the hills of San Francisco from the time we were kids in the park, Golden Gate Park and so forth. But we work together to help people wherever we can. Here, you're paying for the toothpaste and toothbrushes that I'm passing out in a tsunami-stricken area. And you're doing medical work. I'm a doctor, but my kids say not the kind that can help you, so it's in theology. But here, the medical team said, here, you can take blood pressure. So that's what I did for a week. And this village totally wiped out by a tsunami. You took the young woman there in the brown shirt, put her on a plane. She lost her entire family in that picture I just showed you before. She was a Muslim. God loves her. And you put her on a plane and flew her to Jakarta, where a Christian family adopted her into the home. Her only surviving uncle said, don't come around my family. This was in northern part of Indonesia. He said, you're cursed. But you said you're not cursed. You embraced her, the image of God in that young woman, 15 years old. And you cared enough to send her. I don't know if you recognize Pastor Henke. He's on the left side of that picture. He's from this district. He pastors a church here in San Francisco. So that's what we do. We just try and help. 14,000 refugees in Greece. Vicki and I with some other missionaries and lay people from Australia and other places. We went into that camp and represented with what you gave us to try and help. And we prayed with many people and tried to encourage them. These people's homes had been bombed to smithereens. Ukraine is not the only place where we have a war going on. It's just the one that's getting all the press right now. But if you go to Yemen or South Sudan, you've got tragedy, as you prayed earlier, Pastor Jeff, all over the world. God, have mercy. And his mercy comes through your hands, through my hands, setting up tents, passing out food, welcoming the refugee, the immigrant. That's what we do, even at danger sometimes to our lives. I noticed the prayer request for protection. I've asked people about their prayer. They don't want to pray for protection. They want to pray for courage in the midst of persecution. That's a different sort of prayer. And Vicki and I, we get in on a plane, we go in and we go out. We go in and we go out, but they have to live in persecution. This young man, he helped me set up my PowerPoint in one of our schools in Southeast Asia. And he graduated and went to his country. I won't mention it because we're online, but here are the police arresting him last March. He spent March to October in jail. And then one of his colleagues sent us this picture of them burning the churches down and Christians' homes. We know of a pastor who every Saturday night, every Friday or Saturday, they let him out of jail. Every morning, Monday morning, they arrest him and put him in jail because he preached the gospel. And so our field director asked him, how are you tolerating this? You've been doing this for a year. He said, I'm not tolerating. I'm rejoicing in this. God's given me the best of both worlds. Monday through Friday, I preach to people in prison. And Friday or Saturday through Sunday, I get to preach to my own people and be with my family. He said, I'm on a mission for God. So don't pray for my protection. Pray for my courage. Pray that God will give me the strength and the wisdom to be his missionary. Well, I'm going to finish with this. You'll recognize the picture of one of the people here. This is your Nazarene hospital in Papua New Guinea. About 50 or 60 years ago, you put some people on boats and planes, and they traveled 3 months to get from Scotland to there. And they started teaching and preaching. They came from Australia, Scotland, the United States. And they spent months, 7 years actually, ringing a bell out in the Jimmy Valley until a chief was converted. No converts for 7 years. And suddenly a chief gets converted. And in that culture, the whole tribe got converted. Then it spread. And you fast forward to today, you have tens of thousands of Nazarene brothers and sisters. And you've been teaching nursing, teaching how to teach. We've got a teacher's training college that you own and operate. You have a hospital, a nurses training college. And when you fly in, the pilot just dipped the plane enough one time when I was going in there to meet with the boards. All those white top buildings you own and operate. Your hospital is the big white one in the middle. And then all those little white buildings are missionaries. You have over 50 missionary families there. Children, surgeons. You will recognize one in a minute. Just down the road, 20 minutes, you have a Bible college and the teacher's training college. And those boards I showed you earlier, the Papua New Guinean, those 3 boards, those boards were meeting with me and some other people in education to try and form the next Nazarene University. And they were on track when I left there a couple of years ago to do that within about 8 years. Here's your Bible college. I had the privilege of sharing with them on many occasions in one of your classrooms. Because of you, this happens. You know, if you're a nurse and you want to go to Papua New Guinea, you can't get a visa today because you've done such a great job of training nurses and educating and graduating nurses. They don't need nurses in New Guinea anymore. It's through your school that they're populating the country with nurses. If you're a surgeon, we'll put you on a plane and you'll be there tomorrow, okay? We need surgeons, particularly during COVID. It's been a huge stress on our system there. There's 2 of our surgeons. You might recognize them. One of them lives here in California now, Bill, on the right there in the red shirt. And you recognize the young woman there in the middle. You support her. This church has adopted her, and she's a member of the Santa Cruz Church, and She's one of your sisters. She's a full-time global missionary, just like me and Vicki. Here's an up-and-coming surgeon. There's another one. Because Ben Bratliff, the surgeon there in that picture before, he said one of his goals was to make sure there were indigenous surgeons by the time he retired. His dad spent almost 40 years there. Now Ben is just starting the last 4 or 5 years, and that's his goal. And you built this dam because electricity went off in your hospital several times a day. So can you imagine in the middle of a surgery losing electricity? They lost patients because of the lack of energy. So you built a dam, $3 million. You partnered with Australia, Papua New Guinea, Church of the Nazarene. And you hired local people and you sent teams. The kids think it's a great place to swim. They jump off, and then mom loves it because she doesn't have to do the laundry. I've watched missionary families with their kids jump in that canal that runs the turbines, that operates the electricity, creates the electricity. And Vicki and I met a woman in another country whose husband went there and built that canal. He spent a month with a backhoe, and dug that canal. And that's what we do. We just all come together. And here's what it's about. I love that sign. That's what we're about. We're just instruments in the hand of our Creator God, who's allowed us to partner with Him. Every one of your units are full. This is the maternity ward. And every one of these nurses, men and women, they're about 50% men nurses and 50% women there in our school. Every one of them receives 12 units in evangelism and church planting. That's a nurse. And it's a part of our strategy to take the gospel. There are 832 languages in Papua New Guinea, in one country. How many do you have here in San Francisco? I think about 300 in the Bay Area last time I looked. And 832 in one country. And we're trying to get the gospel. Jesus said, go. And these nurses go out. This is one of your classrooms. I mean, that's what you own and operate. You should be proud. And they plant these churches. This is planted by a Nazarene nurse. And here's the latest one that came from the field director recently to me. I spoke at their commencement not too long ago, about 1,000 people there. On the way out of the country, this young woman, Lydia, yelled my name. We were at the baggage claim. She was getting on another plane to go further into Papua New Guinea, our second plane, and I was getting ready to go to Australia. And I said, Lydia, she was magna cum laude and spoke and sat with me on the platform the day before. So I said, where are you going? She said, I'm going back home. I just graduated. I said, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going to start a clinic. Now she had to get on another plane, get on a bus, probably walk a day to get to her village. And way out there in those mountainous regions, you're going to have a Church of the Nazarene with a clinic because you trained her to follow Jesus. We read this earlier, Pastor Jeff did. Let's read it together. And when you come to Samaria, right after Samaria, let's put in this beautiful name after St. Francis, San Francisco. God's put you on a mission here. Let's read it together. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, San Francisco, and to the ends of the earth. Jesus said that, didn't he? So what's your mission? I don't know, but you've got one. You're not maybe a missionary, but you are missional, and God's given every follower of Christ a mission. Theo is 95. Last time I saw her in Perth, Australia, she complained that they took her license away. I said, Theo, it's probably a good idea. She said, yeah, but I thought I lost my ministry. I said, what was your ministry? She said, I would take my car, fill it with stuff, go to the Aboriginal people out back, and I would care for the children. She said, then I discovered I had to take a taxi, and every taxi driver was an Arabic-speaking man. And I realized God gave me a new ministry. She said, I'm so small and so tiny, I don't intimidate anybody. So I just say to the Arabic taxi driver, "Hi, I'm Theo. What's your name?" And she writes, "Are you married?" She writes the name down. "Or do you have children?" She writes the names down. They drive all the way out there, an hour, hour and a half. The man watches her unload and he helps her unload and serve the children. They hang around there a little bit. He takes her back home and she says, "Can I pray for you before I get out of the taxi?" And she said she's never had any taxi driver say no. And she said, "God has given me a new mission." She's 95. This guy's 11. He lives in Nampa, Idaho, and he heard some of these stories like I'm sharing this morning. And he said, "Mom, I want to do something." So they went to Costco and bought some hot dogs and Cokes, went to a sports field. He raised $248 for Sao Paulo, Brazil. So Vicki and I just say thanks. Everybody does something, and the Holy Spirit orchestrates the church. Nazarene missionaries aren't fully supported 100%. We pay for some of our own medical, our retirement, our travel, not all of our travel, but some of our travel, not all of our medical, but some of our medical, and those kinds of things, ministry commitments. So the offering you're going to receive goes for that. And we just want to say thank you. And Pastor Jeff gave me permission to put this QR up because some of you are online if you want to give that way, and I'll report to him what comes in that way. Thank you for being our family, Jeff, your parents. We have deep feelings in our heart for you and your ministry here. Thank you for letting me come and letting Vicki come, and may God bless you.